Hello everybody, and welcome to the next episode of Thriving in Lockdown. Today, I am really delighted to be interviewing Jill Ross, and we're going to be having a conversation around grief, about grief and how some of us might be experiencing grief in this current season. So first off, Jill, why don't you just kind of introduce yourself for those who don't know you, a little bit about your background, maybe?
Thank you. Yes, I have been working as a counsellor for probably the last 18 years, and more recently I trained as a counselling supervisor. I've been doing other jobs alongside that. I was a nurse for, I realised yesterday when they were cheering on the NHS and Florence Nightingale that I haven't quite been in the NHS for as long as we're remembering her, but probably 40 years as a registered nurse. So I've got some background in understanding people and consultations but more recently working in private practice as a counsellor.
So one of my friends a couple of weeks ago now, we were having a conversation, just asking how one another were doing. And they said to me, you know what, I feel like I'm grieving certain things at the moment. And as we got into the conversation, they explained 2 or 3 areas of their life where actually things have, particularly in this lockdown thing that we're experiencing, life had changed so much that they felt like they'd had to kind of say goodbye to life as they knew it and embrace this new thing. And they recognized in themselves that they were grieving. That kind of triggered something in me, actually. And I thought, wow, maybe that is something that all of us to one degree or another are experiencing. I mean, from your perspective, is that kind of normal? Is that something that you would be expecting people to be experiencing at the moment, grief?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that a lot of people are suffering from grief, but they might not name it as such. I think if you think of loss as a different word to grief, I think that's probably helpful. And I think currently we're all suffering a great deal of loss, a loss of freedom,
Yeah.
a loss of work, and that brings with it status and a reason for being, a reason for getting up in the morning. As loss of responsibility, which could be quite nice for a while. But we're also suffering losses of choices. We can't choose what we always used to choose. So we're restricted in that. I think one of the biggest ones probably is physical contact. If you're living on your own or even just with one other person, that physical contact is so important. Lots of people are missing that.
Yeah.
There's losses of the usual routines and rituals and the things that make us who we are, that identity. And so we're losing the comfort of those roles and the status of those roles. And we've lost normal because the world has suddenly changed for good. So there's so many losses, and they all tend to come together, and sometimes that can compound an existing grief of something else, but it certainly is a huge sense of loss, I would agree.
Yeah. And so obviously, there are lots of clever, intelligent people who have studied the process of grief. I think it might be just quite helpful to explore that a little bit. So there are certain stages of grief, aren't there? Can you just talk us through those, just a kind of basic level, really, those common stages of grief?
Yeah. There's usually an initial phase of grief if you're talking about losing someone, and it's usually a stage that could be a sort of degree of shock and denial. There's usually a numbness, where we're trying to make sense of the fact that we've lost someone or something. And that is quite a useful stage. It cushions us from the awfulness of the reality of what's happened. But it's just a bit awkward if you stay in that stage for too long, in the stage of denial. So short term, it can be very useful, but longer term, it can be problematic. And then there are different stages that we go through. We can go through anger, which sort of shows itself to a lesser degree in frustration, irritability, anxiety, blaming. We can go through stages of guilt, regrets, shame, blaming ourselves, blaming other people, and feeling aggrieved, that something has been taken from us. And if you're thinking of that in terms of at the moment, it's about, our freedom has been taken away, our jobs have been taken away. A lot of people haven't made that choice themselves, so they have no choice in that. And that can feel very unfair and unjust, and that keeps you stuck in that sense of anger. And then we move through to the stages of acceptance of what's happened. And that sometimes can involve, coming to terms with our powerlessness and acceptance of that. And sometimes it can be a forgiveness issue that keeps us stuck. But we come to eventually to an acceptance of something is different, and this is the new normal stage. And I guess that's a sort of broad brush, really, because people are so different in the way that they grieve. So it's not a straight line. And sometimes we go in and out of that, and we come back to different things that we then need to look at again, really.
Yeah. And obviously I'm aware that for some people at the moment, they will be experiencing that grief in terms of they have actually lost loved ones. That's obviously a thing. For the majority of people, it will be grief around some of the things you've described, losing or saying goodbye to relationships, life as we know it, the old normal. In what ways would you expect that, maybe for some people they've recognized that they're grieving already. Maybe for others, actually, this might be a bit of a light bulb moment. It was for me in my conversation with my friend.
Yeah.
What might be the kind of the signs and the outworking of that grief that people could be looking out for that might actually, help them understand that, I am grieving and I need to think of this as that I am grieving. What might be some of those things?
I think it comes with a host of emotions. So one of the things that we can do is ask ourselves, well, what am I feeling right now? Am I feeling heavy? Am I feeling sort of pushed down? Do I feel as I've got my own individual grey cloud on top of my head that's just a constant pressure? And that's a feeling of depression. It's sometimes that is to do with helplessness and just not seeing a way forward and hopelessness. You can feel an anger or a general irritation with everybody and anything. And it can be overreacting to things. And that's usually because actually underneath that, there's a real resentment that we're having to walk through this. And if we haven't come to terms with that, then we are going to be continually irritable and to our nearest and dearest usually. So there'll be fluctuations of mood. So one day you may think you've sussed this out and you're fine and you're okay, but you might wake up the next morning feeling quite different. And that's sometimes because that's overnight. We're processing stuff as we dream, and our brains are processing things. We can have some very unusual dreams in lockdown. And that is because in our subconscious, our subconscious is trying to make sense of what's happening to us. So I don't know if we get very far with the analysis of those dreams, but they can be pretty weird. I think that's very normal. So that grief can feel so heavy, and we can feel powerless. So we can start to exert our power where we can. So, people start to clean everything in sight. Our behaviour is determined by those feelings that we're struggling with. So we tend to try and take control over whatever situation we're in to lower our anxiety levels. And that's perfectly normal, really. And all of this, which is interesting to say, really, a lot of the reactions that we will be experiencing are very normal reactions to being put in this totally abnormal situation. So it's it's just recognizing that we're going to have a whole range of emotions, and just I think to stop every now and again and just think, what am I feeling at the moment? Because it will give you a clue as to what you need to do next with that.
Yeah, that's really helpful, and I think I can relate to a lot of that. Just kind of personally, I think for me, one of the things I've recognized, which absolutely resonates with what you said, is just feeling quite easily overwhelmed by things. Things that I would normally be able to take in my stride can quite easily make me feel, and I kind of notice it in myself, like, wow, I feel, these are small things that I could normally just go with in a normal day, but for some reason they're having a bigger impact on me. It's almost like they're magnified because there's just all this other stuff going on internally in the meantime. So that's really really helpful for me, just personally. So maybe for some people there's a recognition there of, okay, yeah, it's blatantly obvious, I am grieving the loss of this or this. And it's really helpful to hear you say that is perfectly normal. What would be the advice given to somebody? How can we do this well if we recognize that we are all grieving to some extent? What can we be doing in the midst of that grieving process?
I think, first of all, give ourselves permission to grieve. To give ourselves permission to have a day off, to recognize that it's incredibly tiring to walk through this sort of stuff because it's quite different to our normal activity. And acknowledge that and be open about it and say to one another, I'm having a rubbish day today, or I'm feeling really exhausted, I need to go and have a rest. It's fine to do that. Talk to people. Our relationships are vital at this time. We need to connect with each other in whatever way we find we can do that. And social media is good for that, or pick up the phone or walk past somebody's house and wave at them. It's connecting is really important, not withdrawing. So if you find yourself withdrawing, it's something to notice and think, oh no, I'm not going to do that. Keep reaching out to others and rediscover old friends and family, really. It's good to connect, I think. I would also say physically, our physical health takes a toll at this time. So it's just important to just watch what we're eating, to exercise and to get good sleep. So just check those things out. If anyone's feeling that they're excessively tired, just check you're getting enough sleep. Listen to our bodies, because our bodies tell us what we need to know very often. Don't bottle up our emotions. If we're sad, allow ourselves to be sad and just sit with it and say, I'm really sad today, I'm having a sad day. And just face it. Don't avoid the painful feelings, because that's what happens. That's how you get stuck in any loss or grief, is that we try to keep ourselves busy and distracted, but we don't actually acknowledge what we're feeling. So we need to sit with that, and it's uncomfortable, it's difficult, it's much harder to displace it or distract ourselves, and those have their place as well, to keep busy and to do things, but at times we need to just stop and see what we're feeling. What else can we do? We can reframe things in our heads. We can say, okay, I'm stuck at home. Okay, well, actually, if I reframe that, I'm being given a sabbatical to enjoy. I have time off. I've got an extended holiday or a week of Saturdays. So that's reframing something which is negative into something that is positive. Be real. Be real with people. The people you can be real with, just be real with. And in a spiritual context, I think connect with God, because He has got things to say to us, and actually He's loving the fact that we've got time to spend with Him that otherwise we're too busy for. So I think connect with God would be one important thing I think that we could all do as well. Because he's really, he's close to the brokenhearted and near to those who are crushed in spirit. That's what he wants to do. He wants to come close to us and to mend our broken hearts.
Yeah, that's good. I think one of the things I found quite helpful, actually, which I wonder if is quite a specific question to ask ourselves. After my conversation with that person, I felt compelled actually to go away and actually spend a little bit of time thinking about what are the things that I am grieving, like what have I lost here? Because I think it was actually a really helpful process to me, because the first thing I was recognizing was actually the symptoms of grief, without ever fully recognizing or asking the question, well, what is it that I am grieving here? And that for me was really helpful, actually, to ask, what is it that I've lost in this season that is making me feel this way? And actually to name those things and to recognize them, because actually you're right, some of the reframing as well is, well, that will probably come back at some point. Some of them might not, but it's that just kind of helpful. So I found that really helpful. That might be something that would be helpful to others, I guess, to kind of ask that same question. If you one of the things you talked about was the grief cycle is something that we experience and is normal, but there is a danger in kind of getting stuck somewhere. If somebody recognizes that they are just stuck in that, like, what are there some places they could go to get additional help? Are there some tools, resources out there that you're aware of that you could point people to?
Yeah, I think that one of the signs of getting stuck is that you can tend to just go round and round with things going round and round in your head, sort of almost like on a video loop, not being able to move on from, not being able to see something differently, just feeling these feelings, being totally overwhelmed. And I think that the first thing to do is to talk to somebody nearby, if you can do that. Contact your friends, contact your the people closest to you. For us in church, that's their life group leaders, pastoral team, and just to be able to say, I am struggling. That's the first thing, is to reach out, because sometimes that can be very simply diffused by just somebody being in contact. And for all of us, I think it's important to be looking out to see who's not been we've not been in touch with for a while. If there seems to be just like an ongoing heaviness that is getting worse, then you can reach out for professional help. There are organisations that you can just ring. You can always, and if you're feeling really low or feeling despairing, you can phone the Samaritans, who are always available to chat. But there's also an organisation called At a Loss, which is atalos.org.uk, which I'm sure we can put the details on for later. And they have they're a Christian organisation, and they have something called Grief Chat, which is manned from 9 o'clock in the morning till 9 at night, where you can literally just phone up and have a chat to somebody and just say, I'm really struggling at the moment, and is this normal? Because very often that's what we want to know, is what's going on, and somebody else helps us to interpret that. And for people who are struggling with a bereavement, because that very often when what happens at this sort of time is that all our losses tend to join together. So we may have had a bereavement a while ago, but still be in that process of coming to terms with it, and it'll be highlighted at this time. So, and it's almost like all our losses come together. It's a bit like streams and tributaries all flowing into one river. And so it can suddenly be overwhelming, because one loss joins to another and you don't end up knowing quite what you're grieving for. But it seems to all come together and it swirls together. So if that is the case, then Holy Trinity Brompton do a bereavement course, which is coming up I believe in June or July, 6th of July to the 10th of August. And that's 5 free sessions online, very much like the Alpha course or the marriage course, and you can ring and book into that. So that's an evening thing. So I think those are really good resources. And also you can phone a counsellor, and in York, if you think actually you're going to need some counselling sessions, you can go on the BACP website or counselling directory, and that will list all the professional counsellors who are people that you would, you can actually be certain will look after you professionally, and so you can go and get professional help that way.
So I wonder, Jill, just to finish things off, would you be willing to pray for people? There'll be people who are, maybe just grieving small things. There'll be people who'll be grieving the loss of jobs and people and all kinds of big things as well. Would you just be willing to pray for people who might be experiencing that grief at this point, and then we'll wrap things up?
Certainly. Father, we know that you understand us and every circumstance of our lives. And so, Lord, I just want to bring to you anyone who is feeling just that deep sense of pain and loss at this time. Because I know, Lord, that you are wanting to be close to us. And Jesus, you were a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. You knew what it was like to go through difficult times and to come out the other end for the joy that was set before you. And Lord, I want to pray for those who are struggling at the moment. I want to ask you, Lord, that you would reach out to them, that you would bring them your peace, that you'd revive that sense of hope inside them that knows actually this is not the end of the story. Because although, the morning goes in the night, morning comes, we go through that morning, it's a nighttime feeling, but joy comes in the morning. So Lord, I pray that for all of those who are struggling with this, that you would bring that sense of hope, and that each day is a new day with new strength. Lord, just commit them to you and ask you to bless them with your peace. Amen.
Amen. Amen. That's great. Thank you so much, Jill. I just want to maybe finish by reiterating to people who are certainly people watching who are part of our church at Gateway, that if you are struggling in some way, like Jill said, do chat to somebody about it, whether it's somebody in your life group leaders, one of us on the pastoral team, and we'd always be willing to just have a conversation and kind of see how you're doing. So don't struggle on alone. Do get in touch and have a chat with one of us. So thanks for joining us today, Jill. I've really appreciated our conversation. Thanks very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.